Secretary Steve Barclay has told NHS bosses to stop wasting money on diversity staff and hire more doctors. I mean, they've been in power for 13 years. We've got a National Health Service. In theory, the government are running that thing, and yet we've got more diversity nonsense than ever before. I think there are more rainbow lanyards than scalpels right now in the NHS.
Yeah, well, it seems to be, and Steve Barclay's obviously taken the decision this morning that he wants to write and try and deal with that situation. Whether he can or not remains to be seen. I mean, we know from the last few years that the government is so lacking in political ideas and therefore political authority that they often have trouble convincing their own civil servants and all the way down to their own institutions and public sector services of the way to go. So he might make this announcement, but I think it's by no means clear that this will actually result in action. And I think what's notable about the report today is that it shows just how far this is permeated, because this is not just the National Health Service, but it's a recognition that even at a local level, these diversity issues are now so embedded and spending so much money, as he points out, in £100,000 for a diversity officer is a lot of money when we need to deal with important health issues and waiting lists and all the rest of it just now. But whether he can deal with that remains to be seen, and I have my doubts, to be honest, because I think this is really taking a grip of many public sector institutions, but also private companies as well, who espouse this idea of that diversity as a primary value and one must be institutionalised.
I always think it's a madness, isn't it? Because the only people who really buy into this stuff is about the 0.2% of the population who like to sound fancy at their posh people dinner parties, and most of the population don't want it. But whenever you hear of grotesque unisex toilets and rainbow zebra crossings and whatever it might be, you know that there is one ghoul in the background haunting everything, haunting the corridors of power, and that is a ghoul called Stonewall. Nobody voted for them, but people did vote for the government. Is it about time that 10 Downing Street turned round and said to Stonewall, sling your hook?
Yeah, and I think, as you say, lots of people would agree with that sentiment. It's also the case that for 3 or 4 years now, people have been expressing concerns over this, and the government is constantly saying it's going to act and to eradicate this situation. And all the time, it always seems to be the case that their words fail to meet their actions. So, as I say, I think it's very doubtful as to whether that this is enough to deal with this situation. I think there needs to be a much more thoroughgoing understanding and analysis of what it is that these diversity values mean within public sector institutions, because I think they very much come from the top. They permeate right the way through these organisations. And everybody from staff working in the wards, in this case in the NHS, right the way through to doctors, they're mandated into these training exercises. They're told that this is the way that we must think, that these are the values that we believe in, and there really needs to be a big reckoning with this, I think.
Now, do you think that Rishi Sunak himself has been on one of those training courses coming up with a policy of banning gay and trans conversion therapy? Because on the surface of it, that seems like quite a good thing. You shouldn't be marching gay people off to some sort of camp and making them do star jumps and, you know, wish that they were born straight. But when you put this into legislation, is that not going to mean that talking therapies, actually having psychological counselling to treat a psychological condition such as dysphoria, is suddenly under legal threat from a government?
I think that's true. I mean, it's a bit difficult to know whether Rishi Sunak himself has been on a training course or not, because he seems to flip-flop on his ideas about this from day to day. I mean, he's talking about how he understands some of these situations in terms of transgenderism and gender ideology, and he's determined to take action. In the next minute, he's turned 180 degrees round, and he's announcing that he's going to introduce measures like this conversion therapy ban. So it's actually quite difficult to know what's going on here. I mean, we can be pretty sure that if the Labour government, if Labour gets elected next year, then they will certainly introduce it. But all the signs are that the Tories, despite talking again about opposing it, very much agree with it. And I think you're right. It is a particular concern, because it does raise very important issues, especially in terms of things like the freedom of conscience of individuals to have the conversations, whether they're therapists or religious groups or whatever. But they're people entrusted to have these difficult conversations, and they need to be able to act according to their instincts and give the advice that people would like to hear from them.